Coming up on today's show, has Keir Starmer bottled it for Labour on HS2? Plus, you may recall Richard wrote to the Secretary of State while Mark Harper has delegated his reply to Richard's letter to a civil servant. Has Harry Potter's favourite train, the famous Hogwarts Express, hit the buffers now that operator West Coast Railway's Mark 1 services have been derailed by ORR? ASLEF announces yet more strikes. But are they working? We ask, should ASLEF properly take the gloves off? Also, driving a driverless train with a steering wheel. Yes, really. Hello, and welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, here in a very, very cold but lovely Lincolnshire, and
me, Richard Bowker, here in Wiltshire, where it is glorious sunshine and bitterly cold.
And all settled in the new house, Richard.
All settled in. It was a little bit, tense at moments.
So no,
but nobody fell out. No. It was fine. It was just. Well, I don't think so. Anyway, you might have to ask Madeline. But it was quite hard work. But anyway, we've done it. We're here.
What I was going to say was no more Luton vans. Then you've seen the last one, have you?
No more vans. I'm done. I'm done with oh God, should I even say? No, others are available. I'm done with hire vans now forever.
Good, excellent. Well, we hope you're very happy there, and both Steph and I look forward to seeing it for a Green Signals housewarming lunch or something when we can fit it in.
Excellent.
That would be good. Okay. If you're enjoying what we do here, do give the episode a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube and hit that subscribe button. Apart from the warm and fuzzy feeling that the three of us enjoy, seeing your appreciation, we're all human, it really does help us to grow the show and do more of what you want and we all enjoy. It's also worth popping over to greensignals.org, our website, and signing up to our mailing list, so that we can let you know when we publish new episodes, and we also send out exclusive content too from time to time, so it's well worth joining the throng. But right now, we're back with another magazine-style show on the latest news and developments from the past week, because, like the weather, there's plenty of them. Developments, that is. And it's been another one full of troubling stories, hasn't it, Richard?
Yeah, it has, and it just kind of seems to be every blooming week, doesn't it? But there's no lack of stuff hitting the national headlines, and not all of it in a good way. Very quickly, though, I thought it is worth a really brief update on where we are with Rishi Sunak and his helicopter, because it seems to be the story that just keeps on going.
Well, it does, and there's the national media have really got the teeth into this one now, with lots of people talking about even to the models of helicopters that he's using and so on. And I'm sure we're going to come back to this, hopefully, if we get the answers to the FOI that one of our Green Signalers put in. That was Green Signaler Richard Hunt, and we're hoping that will generate a meaningful answer, but of course it could just be rejected, couldn't it? But in the meantime, we've carried on digging and discovered some figures all ready for that moment, and that some that shed light on the true scale of his growing penchant for whirlybirds. That's a good phrase, isn't it? Penchant for whirlybirds.
Excellent. No, it's really
good. Let's summarise this. In just 7 months, Sunak boarded 23 domestic flights on RAF jets and helicopters, nearly one a week. And for context, that is far more than any of his predecessors at number 10. It's been reported that he's used private helicopters too in November and December 2022, costing about £16,000 simply to fly back and forth between London and his North Yorkshire constituency, where there's served by a perfectly good rail service. They were apparently funded by Tory party donors, but I'm not sure that makes it all right, because this is about the climate, not just the cost to the taxpayer. But for now, we'll wait and see if Richard Hunt's FOI brings us closer to some real answers, whereupon we can really go both barrels at this one, can't we, Richard?
Absolutely. Although, interestingly, you mentioned about Freedom of Information Act and getting answers back from people. I have now finally had a reply to the letter that I sent the Secretary of State back in November on West Coast and phase 2 of HS2.
But is it a reply from the Secretary of State?
No, it isn't. And I wasn't offended by that. I mean, it's quite normal that these things get delegated to a sort of a private secretary or a correspondence team. So no, that bit, I kind of, that's fine. What's not fine is what they've said, or more importantly, what they've not said. Back in November, after Green Signals had been at the Transport Select Committee, the Secretary of State, Mark Harper, then gave evidence, I think the week after. I mean, it was
The 15th, the week after we did it.
The week after we did it. And he said a couple of interesting things. And two of the things he talked about were in the context of the data, the analysis that had been used in deciding to cancel phase 2 of HS2. And it suggested, what he said was there'd been quite a lot of data and analysis done that nobody had seen. So I wrote to him on the 22nd of November and just pulled out the bits from his evidence where he'd said there was this analysis. I mean, I'll just give you one example. When he was talking about the rate at which demand would return, because we all accept that COVID had a bit of an impact, right? He said, we looked extensively at modelling and assumptions about demand. Okay, so that was quite a statement. So I said, could we see the detailed capacity analysis? Could we see the extensive modelling that you and your officials did in advance of making the decision that you did on HS2 phase 2? So I've got a reply, stated the 10th of January. It's page long, and it says absolutely nothing of any interest. And you can read it in one or two ways. You can just, because it just restates what he said at the Select Committee, really. So you can either read it and say, they just didn't want to answer at all, so I've just been fobbed off. Or you can read it and say, there wasn't actually any extensive and detailed demand analysis, because if there was, they'd have just said, you can't have it, right? So I think what we'll do, I think we'll put this, there's no restricted or sensitive markings on any of these letters, so I think we'll stick my original letter and his reply on our website and invite listeners to form their own view as whether they think it is a reasonable response to a reasonable question.
Absolutely. They're letters to a public official with a reply not marked confidential. So they're public documents, as far as I'm concerned. Get them on the website and let everybody have a read. That is non-answer, which is very disappointing.
Can I mention one other thing on this?
Of course you can.
Nigel?
I'm not in charge here, Richard. You can talk about what you want.
Right. There was one interesting thing that Mark Harper did. He had a trip to Japan.
He did.
In June 2023, right? It was basically the very end of June. And he tweeted this, and we'll put this tweet on our website as well. We'll do a little screen grab and put it.
There's going to be lots to look at in the additional resources section,
here, right? He said this on the 30th of June, 2023. And this is his tweet headed Britain's Bullet Train with a couple of Union Jacks. In Japan, I saw the benefits high-speed rail can bring to connect communities and grow the economy. That's why, despite the global inflationary pressures, we remain fully committed to building HS2. Building it shows we believe in Britain. Right? Now, that's interesting because that is just 3 months before the decision to cancel phase 2 to Manchester. So that's a pretty big U-turn in 3 months. And second, and most interestingly, we know one of the biggest issues that's affected the so-called soaring costs of HS2 is inflation. And he actually specifically references that in his tweet and says, despite all the global inflationary pressures,
he excludes
we're still going to do it because we believe in Britain. Well, clearly he doesn't believe in Britain anymore. Or that's the only logical takeout that you can have.
I mean, we've mentioned before that back in March, the Prime Minister had said that the government remains fully committed. But this is even closer to the decision. It's less than 3 months from Sunak standing up in Manchester and scrapping HS2 North. It's a handbrake turn of epic proportions.
Yeah. It is worth watching the little film that Mark Harper did when he did that tweet. He did a little film. It's only about a minute long. It's probably not even that. Just listen to what he says about growing the economy, and what it's done for Japan, what it'll do for Britain, connecting London, Birmingham, and Manchester. Right?
Yeah.
Just remember when you watch it, it's only 3 months later that
Maybe
they
we could
cancelled it.
invite green signalers to forward and retweet that all over the place. And
That'd be good, wouldn't it?
yeah, he'd hate that. So let's just do it. Still on HS2, but moving to the news of the week, if you like, segueing seamlessly. We leap the political divide because Keir Starmer seems to have bottled it on HS2, and he was somebody else who was saying at about the same time, or consistently, wasn't he? We will build HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail in full. So, Richard, tell us what's happened.
Well, I looked at what he said. He was on BBC Northwest Tonight, which is the local news programme in the Northwest. And I'm quoting what the BBC said he said, right? But he said that the Labour leader says he can't stand here and commit to reversing the government's decision. So Keir told BBC Northwest Tonight it was, quote, not possible to do HS2 as the government had, quote, blown the budget. Contracts are going to be cancelled, he said. So the question is, has he changed his mind on HS2, or is there something else going on? I don't know. I'd be fascinated.
Politics.
Well, it is politics. I mean, this is a slightly tangential comment, maybe. But one of the challenges for any Labour Party trying to win a general election is they have to convince the people that they are fiscally responsible. They're not going to mess up the economy, and they can be sort of trusted with defence, right? If you look historically, those are the two of the big issues that people have always been a bit nervous about. The
Conservatives always claim that the Labour Party will tax and spend and that sort of thing. So, yes, I get that point.
So I can understand why he would say, look, they've blown the budget, i.e., we are the ones who understand fiscal responsibility, right? We can be trusted with the economy. So we're not just going to commit to crazy expenditure when we don't really understand the books. So I kind of, well, I don't kind of get that. I get that, really. So I wonder, I think it's a bit unfortunate that it happened around a railway project in a way, but you can kind of understand what the political narrative here is. It's you can't trust them, but you can trust me.
Also, and this has literally only just occurred to me as you were speaking, that the Conservatives have made big play about distributing that 37 billion across transport projects right across the north, including Plymouth, as we know. All those people who are celebrating that they're going to get all this money may well think, oh, well, Labour's going to take it all away again. Now, we're not going to get that bus or tramway or anything else because they're going to put it all back into HS2. So
that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about that.
That's an extra political aspect to it, isn't it? It's certainly not helpful. Here's a question, though.
Go on.
You'd have to be deranged not to understand and get the arguments about 2A. It is so self-evidently needed. Is somebody going to have to build it anyway?
Well, it's a very, very fair question. And I think, look, the one thing it's got is it's got an Act of Parliament, right? It's on the statute book.
Oven ready.
Oven ready, shovel ready, I think is one of the. Oh, I hate that phrase, but I know what they mean, right? We're not quite ready to go because they haven't actually got all the land, but it's past the biggest, arguably the biggest,
got the Act of
hurdle,
Parliament,
which is getting an Act of Parliament, right? I mean, I don't know. We are now really speculating, aren't we? But I call it something else. Don't call it HS2. Call it the Stafford bypass if you want, which is actually what we talked about 20 years ago.
Oh, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. But from a capacity point of view, it's
blimey.
It's really crucial, and one hopes that they do resurrect that. Do you know there's an interesting thing here, though? The one other thing that Sir Keir said, I think around the same time, he recommitted to transport in the north, the northern powerhouse, whatever that is in terms of northern powerhouse.
The east-west thing.
Yeah, right. And, connecting communities.
Liverpool to Hull.
That entire sort of corridor. And it is a massively populated corridor. I don't know. I am winging it a bit now, right? But I'm just going to stick this out there and see if anybody who listens to Green Signals goes, "That's outrageous. You can't say that." But I do say this in the context of being from the Northwest, right? So I was born in Oldham and grew up in Chorley and Blackburn. So this is my part of the world before anybody thinks I'm having a go. When there's an interesting measure of economic value called gross value added, GVA, right? I will put a little definition on the website for folks, but it's basically a kind of proxy for GDP of if you do GVA by region, you can say what does each region kind of contribute in terms of the overall sort of
so it's a measure of
country.
Economic activity in the different regions.
When it's done at a regional level, in effect, yes.
Okay,
right? That's a valid summary. It's a bit more nerdy than that, but it doesn't have to be. That's pretty much it. GVA is not constant across the country, right? And actually, that's why I think it was one of the reasons why the government came up with this whole levelling up idea. If you read the levelling up white paper, it's a little bit flowery language. They talk about the Italian Renaissance and a contemporary Medici model in the UK. But when you kind of cut the crap, really, what they mean is finding a way that every region has an opportunity, benefits, and all the rest of it, and it's not sort of skewed. Right? And who could really argue with that, really? And because when you look at the numbers, and I have looked at the numbers for the last few years, I'm going to just quote you the 2019 numbers. And if you think those sound a bit old, it's only because 20 and 21 were all a bit skewed because of
COVID.
A lot skewed because of the pandemic. But if you look at the gross value add per head of population, so that's basically taking the gross value add as a big number and dividing it by the number of people that live in each region, right? The UK average in 2019 was £29,944. That was the average per capita GVA. In London, but if that's the average, as far as I can see, only two parts of the country were above the average. Guess where? London and the southeast. Everywhere else is below the average. And in some places, they're quite distinctly below the average. So, for instance, in 2019, against an average of 29,944, Merseyside, £22,082, right? So, whereas Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, and Oxfordshire, £41,542, right? So you get very, very significant deviations. And my concern with this, we're not going to do HS2, but we are going to connect across the north, is there is a risk of connecting places that are all below the national average, whereas what HS2 would have done is really connect them with a place which is above the national average, and that would really drive more levelling up. Now, transport's not the only thing that affects levelling up, let's be honest. But it's a big one. So are we focused on the wrong thing? Question.
So what you're asking is, are we connecting with NPR, say, one part of the country which isn't doing that well or is lower down the scale with another part that's lower down the scale? So you're not going to get any levelling up at all.
You're not going to get quite the same power that you would have done if you connected to the whole of the country yet. Now, it is quite controversial because the rate of improvement of the Northwest, for instance, is actually quite strong. It has been the last. So there is some catching up going on, and that's true. However, it's still not connecting it with London and the Southeast effectively as HS2 would have done.
I'm finding myself, that's all. You're right, but I'm finding myself really sort of motivated by your comments earlier about Phase 2A, and we just rename it the Stafford Bypass, because it does make a difference what you call things, doesn't it? And it would deny people saying, "Oh, they're bringing HS2 back."
Yeah, and it would sort out a problem.
We will leave that one lying there for Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham and Andy Street to do what they will with, because that would be infinitely better than my layman's view, and you've probably got a slightly more informed view, but their idea for a private scheme to run north from Birmingham to Manchester, I think you said in the last show, didn't you, that it's just going to add 10 years, whereas we've got the Act.
They might come up with a better solution, but they'll have lost 10 years in the process. Yeah.
Right, well, do let us know what you think, green signalers, wherever you are and whatever your interests are, because as we found out with the helicopter thing, there's a vast range of expertise out there that people pop up and start giving us information, don't they?
Don't they just? I'll tell you what, though, if people come back and say, it's not about either or, you should do both, that's a perfectly valid answer, by the way.
Yes,
We're not suggesting that you shouldn't deliver better transport across the north. We're just suggesting that, yeah, anyway, let's see what people think.
But just before we move on from that, do urge people to look at that little film of what Harper said on the website, because it's gobsmacking, I think, is the expression of the nature of the handbrake turn, which followed very shortly afterwards. Right, let us move on to another controversy. The long-running West Coast Railways battle with the Officer ORR on a range of safety issues, but primarily about central door locking on slam door stock on West Coast Smart 1 vehicles. Now, West Coast is self-described as the UK's leading special trains operator. It runs Harry Potter's famous Hogwarts Express Jacobite from Fort William to Mallaig, often described as the best rail journey in the world, and it's got some claims in that direction, has lost a judicial review against the ORR in December and has now had its exemption, which allowed it to run Mark 1s on the main line, revoked. So, Richard, you're always good with this stuff. What's it about and where did it start? Go.
Well, thank you. Well, it goes back to some regulations in 1999.
18 years ago they came in, didn't they? That's when they started to...
Yeah. Well, they came in, I think, from 2005, so hence the 18 years, but they sort of predate that as regulation. I mean, it kind of affected me when I was a chairman at the Strategic Rail Authority, because all the brand new trains had been ordered to replace the slam door stock. You know, those old-fashioned doors that you... and we didn't have enough power, but we absolutely had to get rid of the Mark 1s. So that was kind of the bit of a panic, and it was a bit of a panic, actually. About
but not enough power in the third rail, I remember all that.
There was not enough. It was unbelievable. I mean, it was better the further east you went, which I think was largely down to Channelton and Rail Link connection. But the further, when you came around to Sussex, it started getting pretty ropey.
Not for now. But the idea that we as an industry and country went ahead and ordered a fleet of trains for which there wasn't enough juice in the rail is embarrassing, isn't it?
It was, what's the phrase? Suboptimal as a decision. Anyway. So the regulation said you've got to get rid of these. You've got to get rid of these vehicles. I mean, they did a job of work at a point in history, right? But you, without being overly dramatic about it, if you watched our video we did about Clapham and saw what happens to a Mark 1 when it's in a major incident. It's horrific. It's distressing, right? It's distressing. So the idea was get rid of these things. And the regulations say, back in 20 odd years ago, no person shall operate and no infrastructure controller, which is Network Rail, right, shall permit the operation of any rolling stock on a railway if the rolling stock has hinged doors for use by passengers for boarding and alighting from the train, other than doors which have a means of centrally locking them in a closed position. So that was sort of the regulations. And this was a big deal. Apart from what happens in a collision, which is horrible, actually, there was still a lot of incidents involving slam doors. You remember all those videos we used to sort of see from the 70s where as commuter trains were coming into Cannon Street and Waterloo, whatever, they would all open the doors. And you get smacked by one of those and it's serious. So, they're awful things.
It wasn't just that though, Richard. They'd also, all the passengers would be riding on the running boards, little steps, and would leap off the moment they could. And very often they overtook the driver's cab on the train while it was still moving.
I believe there was something like, I believe something like 200 or something incidents a month. It depends quite how you define incident, I guess, but we're talking serious things. And with the removal of the vast majority of these Mark 1 slam door carriages from the network, most of which were south of the river on the commuter network, let's be clear, those kind of incidents have basically gone. So it's dramatically better. Now, under the regulations, the ORR was the Her Majesty's Railway Inspector was permitted to issue exemptions, and West Coast Railways had one of those exemptions, enabling them to run Mark 1s until March 2023. So that's the sort of background to all of this.
Yes, and instead of fitting CDL, central door locking, to comply with its regulations, which will remind us 18 years in place, West Coast many years ago fitted secondary door locking, which sounds a bit sort of techie, but it's not. It's two bog standard brass sliding bolts, if you like, a chunkier version of what's on your bathroom door. And it required a supervising steward on every door of every carriage at every stop, who would slide the bolts back, supervise everybody getting on and off, and then as dispatch came close, make sure the door was properly closed, slide the bolts, and the train could go on. But, the stewards didn't stand by the doors the whole time, and those door bolts could theoretically have still been slid back. Well, you'd want to, but when the train was moving. But there wasn't total control by a single person who then knew that the train was totally secure. Now, the Jacobite contributes, Steph did some digging and has found some great numbers, contributes £19.3 million a year to the Scottish economy. Now, that is just the steam train from Fort William over the 40 miles or so of the West Highland extension to Mallaig, with 4.72 million in ticket revenue from over 100,000 passenger journeys. It's serious business.
It is.
And
it's big business, isn't it?
It is. If it was Bowker Harris Railways, we'd be very happy, wouldn't we? That's a profit for West Coast of around £1 million a year. And incidentally, Transport Scotland have told me on a number of occasions that the Jacobite's the only passenger train in Scotland which requires not a penny of taxpayer support. So I think the thing about it is it generates enough money to warrant doing this.
Well, so let's bring this more up to date then. So they had an exemption, and West Coast decided to judicially review the ORR's decision to not allow them to carry on basically operating the way they
end the exemption.
Now, everybody is entitled to make a judicial review, right? That's clear. But those who listen to Green Signals regularly will remember we talked about judicial review in the context of, oddly enough, HS2. And your grounds for judicial review are quite narrow, and it's quite hard. Basically, you can't use a judicial review to challenge whether the public body has done something you don't agree with. The court is not there to say, well, yeah, I agree with you. I take your side, not their side. What the court's doing is saying, did the public body, in this case the ORR, the railway inspector, act lawfully and rationally in the context of the decision that they took, which was to say, you're not going to get another exemption.
In layman's terms, was the decision properly arrived at?
Yeah. And the court, there were 5 grounds for judicial review. Again, we'll stick it on the website so you can see what it is, this publicly available stuff. And they lost on all 5 grounds. And the court said, no, we think basically the ORR have acted lawfully and rationally, and the grounds for judicial review fail. So that's what's happened legally. And so because ORR had said, if you lose the JR, we will remove the exemption, they removed the exemption. So as it stands today, West Coast Railways cannot run Mark 1s that have not been fitted with central door locking.
That was an interesting point you just made about the fact that if the JR was lost, the exemption ended, because there was a whiff around some of the West Coast statements that it was a bit of a surprise.
I think the ORR were pretty clear. So they said if this happens, then the following, and this
did.
happened, so the following's happened as well.
And if you start to just look at it, unpack it a bit in sort of bullet point terms, the regulations have been known about for many years. They have been in place for 18 years. As the judges made clear, they've spotted or they've taken note of the fact that everyone else has got on with it. West Coast styles itself as the leading operator, and yet all the smaller operators involved, they've done it. So all West Coast had to do really was comply. It wasn't unreasonable. Let's not forget that the success of the Jacobite, and West Coast have done a brilliant job with it in that respect, is it runs 2 separate trains every day, morning and afternoon, over the 40-so miles from Malahide to Fort William. And it's now considering adding a 3rd train in the evening, which had run as far as Arisaig back in order to run within daylight hours. So it requires 2 sets of carriages and 3 large steam locomotives. This is a significant operation. So it would seem obvious, really, that there's no financial obstacle to fitting central door locking, which smaller operators have already done.
Yeah, the court actually didn't allude to it. They said, smaller operators have made this change, right? The ORR's attitude to the heritage sector has been well known since 2019, when they said, right, enough of these exemptions, now you've got to do it. And others, as you say, have done it. I mean, it's a great shame, because, as you've just said, they've done a fantastic job with the Jacobite. It's loved.
And huge demand for it, clearly, if there are a 3rd train.
And not just from on the trains. I mean, people flock to see it. The classic view of it going over that viaduct, Glenfinnan Viaduct. Yeah. So it's massively popular. And, and it's they've done a wonderful, wonderful job. So let's be clear about that. And it does contribute to the Scottish economy. There's no doubt about that either. But, just guys, this has been known about for a while. Everybody else has done it. And the JR now has failed. The problem now is kind of the only thing that's certain is it's created uncertainty. So, the ORR have made it very clear Mark 1s need CDL. West Coast have got Mark 1s that haven't got CDL. So as of today, they can't run them. What comes next? I think we just have to wait and see, but we'll be watching it.
Well, we'll put all the various statements from the ORR, and indeed West Coast have got them, on the website. But I'm just looking at the ORR, or one of the ORR's statements here, which says other charter heritage operators which use the mainline railway have made the necessary investment to install CDL on hinged door rolling stock, or have committed to do so over a transition period, and it remains open to WCRC to do the same. So, ASLEF on strike again. The Train Drivers Union has announced further strikes between January the 30th and February the 5th, plus an overtime ban between January the 29th and February the 6th. So a good deal of disruption amongst the 14 operators affected. General Secretary Mick Whelan said, "We have given the government every opportunity to come to the table, but it has now been a year since we had any contact from the Department for Transport. It is clear they do not want to resolve this dispute. Many of our members have now not had a single penny increase to their pay in half a decade, during which inflation soared, and with it, the cost of living." So very direct comments as ever from Mick. I suppose the big question, Richard, is has it all got very ho-hum? Do people shrug, make other arrangements and just get on with it? Are they achieving anything?
Well, I think that's a fascinating question, because, Mick's got a point, hasn't he? It does appear that nobody wants to resolve it, because if you wanted to resolve it, you'd do something, right? You do something. I mean, I thought it was a fascinating tweet on Twitter, X, still can't get it.
I can't.
That Graham Eccles recounted what happened in the early 80s when Peter Parker was chairman and Bob Reid was chief executive. And they basically...
rostering.
Well, absolutely. We remember all the whole debacle with the bedpan units, as they were known, wasn't it? And they resolved it in the end by just going, right, do you know what? You've got 2 weeks to sign these new contracts. And if you sign a new contract, you can stay. And if you don't sign a new contract, you can't, right?
And they'd be fired effectively, is what we're saying.
Yeah, it was quite brutal, but at least it was something. It brought it to an end. It does feel as if this one is like, if I tell you what, have you ever had really bad toothache? It's like it's a real pain. You wish you hadn't got it, but it's not actually going to be fatal, is it? I suppose it possibly could in extreme circumstances, but it feels like that to me now. Feels like this just isn't getting fixed.
Like a stone in your shoe sort of thing. But
yeah. No, it is that. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this. Somebody maybe needs to up the ante, because otherwise it isn't going to get resolved. And I think it is a reasonable observation from Mick Whelan to say, does anybody actually want to fix this thing? It feels like not. So are they just playing into the government's hands now, which is just, yeah, there you go. Another reason why we shouldn't focus on rail. You just can't fix it.
Can't trust the drivers to stay at work and all this sort of thing.
I'll tell you what really wound me up. And as you know me, Nigel, I don't get easily wound up at all, right? But it was the Rail Delivery Group, a statement that they put out. And I'm going to quote a bit of this, right? Nobody wins when strikes impact lives and livelihoods. Well, we can't argue with that, right? And they're particularly difficult to justify at a time when taxpayers are continuing to contribute an extra £54 million a week to keep services running post-COVID. So why don't they just rename themselves the Department for Transport's comms team? Right? I mean, seriously, since when is it the RDG's job to... Anyway.
So let's just get this straight. You're suggesting that the RDG should be rebranded as the DFT's comms team.
Well, if they're going to put stuff like this out, it's like this Orwellian 1984 thing, isn't it? It's just like, Ministry of Truth. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that statement. It's not inaccurate. It's just that, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, that was an army aeroplane just going overhead. So yeah, I just don't know quite what you do really.
So anyway. You said earlier, and I mentioned it in the head of the programme, do the unions need to up the ante? What specifically you got in mind, Richard, while you're being controversial? Go for it.
Well, I mean, the obvious one is just say, right, you know what? We're just going. We're just going to go all in. It's like walking into the casino and say, it ain't working. We're just going to stick everything on red, and having a bigger showdown. I don't see what this current situation is doing. It's just irritating everybody. It's draining morale. It's upsetting. It's massively inconveniencing people. Because I know people say, oh, there's lots more people working from home now and it doesn't really affect the commuters like it used to do. True. But it's still, millions and millions and millions of passenger journeys are affected. And it's not doing anybody any favours.
Well, we'll see if ASLEF have got anything to say about that. Interesting. Just before we go, Richard, were you aware that the F in ASLEF actually stands for firemen?
I was actually, but I'll bet you, not an awful lot of people.
A little historical quirk there about the Associated Society of Locomotive Engineers, by which they mean drivers, and firemen. So, I mean, I think that's great. The word firemen is still actually...
It's a proud...
It is.
A union with a wonderful history.
It absolutely is. Right. You and I, Richard, have many things in common. One of which was we used to sit...
Where's this going?
We used to sit behind the drivers on Craven's DMUs from our hometowns going spotting at Manchester or Preston.
Yep.
And we're always irritated when he dropped the blind and you couldn't see where he was going. Though often if he did that, he'd just drop his and you could move to the seats on the other side and see over the handbrake handle.
Yeah, and it was because of the glare. I mean, I get all that, but it was very irritating.
It was damned annoying when we wanted to see what was coming. Anyway, look, we weren't the only ones who used to like doing that. Tourists and Londoners alike still seem to scramble for the front seats on the DLR, the Docklands Light Railway. so they can watch out of the front windows and secretly pretend they're driving the train. I admit it, I've done it. No end of people post photos on social media of them sitting in these seats. Apparently, TfL wants to enhance the driving experience and is going to introduce vinyl stickers to put over those covers that cover over the controls so the train captain can drive if there's a problem, with pretend buttons and switches, so that children and anyone else can pretend to drive the train. It's going to be a trial to begin with, but they say it could be used more widely in future. And with 54 new DLR trains being introduced to replace 33 of the oldest ones in 2 years, could be the time to do it. Some of those old trains, incidentally, are now more than 30 years old. We still regard DLR as new, don't we? But
we do,
it's and it's a wonderful thing. I love it.
It is.
30 years old. So, what do you think?
Well, I think the idea is great. Okay. I think engagement, we've all, for those of us who've had kids, anything at all to occupy them for a bit of time. And it's great. And I think they've done this in Copenhagen. I think that's right. They've done something similar. I know you get a bit aerated about this because one of the things they've talked about putting on is kind of pretend steering wheels. And you can't drive a train with a steering wheel, which I don't really care about, to be honest. I think I'm thinking about this as a dad, really, anything to keep the kid occupied. And I think something more tactile that they can actually move rather than just vinyl
stickers. Yes, I'd agree with that.
That bit I completely get. So I don't get quite so concerned about it as others do. But I think it's a great idea. Let's just steering wheel as well. Let's just get it done.
Brilliant. No, it's not a good idea having a steering wheel, Richard. It's a ridiculous idea.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? There's too many journalists who think that trains have to be steered already. And the number of times I've encountered that on some of the media stuff I've done. The most prominent example, which I have to say, was after the dreadful grey rig crash of 2007, when your old boss, Mr. Branson, made that comment about turning his driver into a hero, that he'd steered his derailed Pendolino down the embankment, which was greeted with derision by anybody who knew anything about trains, and actually from quite a few people who didn't. But again, on a really serious note, I'm not a parent, but if I was, I would not want a child of mine to be taught stuff that isn't true. And it's not true, and it's a ridiculous thing to actually encourage the idea that you can steer a train.
I'm not really certain that a 5 or a 6 or 7-year-old kid is really all that focused on what they're learning. It's just the tactile experience, and everybody. I don't know. Listen, I suspect we might have to agree to disagree. I think the one thing we can agree on is that doing something to increase engagement is a good thing, right? Yeah. So,
and I agree with your comment about maybe some little switches rather than stickers, But I remember when Ewan McGregor got the part in Star Wars, he said George Lucas, the director, had to keep telling him off and stopping a take because with the lightsaber he was doing the. He said,
"We're all kids at heart." Nigel.
He said, "I just couldn't stop doing it." He said, and right, George Lucas got. So what I was going to say is, we're now going to get a generation kids at the front going, and the assorted noises that come with it.
What on earth was that? Anyway. I've got no idea if you're listening to this on audio, then I apologise. And if you're watching it on YouTube, well, you'll
apologise. Yeah,
you'll just be as bemused as I was. Anyway, moving swiftly on.
Yeah, the quiz. Get on with the quiz.
The quiz. Yeah. Right. Would you believe nobody got the correct answer last week?
I would, actually, because it's very difficult. I think it was a difficult question.
Do you?
Okay. Well, because it was the whole network, before closures and things.
Yeah.
You need a fair amount of knowledge or know where to dig to get that.
You do. Normally, Google's quite clever with these things, and you can just type in, which station was the first, but it doesn't help you. It doesn't give you the answer. So you're right. You do kind of need to know. We did actually have some good guesses. So Dent was a good guess.
4 miles downhill, a common one as well.
Yeah, it's about 4 miles. But that, of course, I suppose is still open, isn't it? Really, trains can stop.
Reopened.
Indeed. And wonderful job done by the Settle Carlisle Railway Trust with that. Well done, guys. A really good guess was New Galloway in Scotland on the line from Dumfries to Stranraer.
And kind of in the ballpark.
And kind of in the ballpark. And it was a really interesting guess because, of course, New Galloway was not at the station, was actually in a different village altogether. I can't remember the name of it, but there you go, which is a bit weird. But the answer, I believe, is Gatehouse of Fleet, which is on the same line.
Port Road.
It's on the same line, yeah, which was, I think, a good 6 miles from the station to Gatehouse of Fleet. So there you go. So nobody got it. Well, I did, but then that's cheating, isn't it? So there's no prize this week. There's no shout out. But there you go. So this week we've gone for something slightly different, hopefully a little easier. Same rules. First person to send us the correct answer by either a comment on YouTube or on Spotify or by an email gets a shout out. I haven't got my mugs yet, so I can't say we'll send one out just yet. But
when we get in them, I'm excited about the mugs.
Are you getting excited? Right. Well, I tell you, you'll be the first to know. I don't know. I may be the first to know when the post office arrives, but I'll make sure you're the second to know. All right. So this week's question is this. I like this one. What took place for the very last time on the British rail network on the 4th of October, 1971? I was going to say where, but that will kind of, I don't know.
Maybe give it away a bit.
Yeah, I might give it away. But anyway, it was on the British rail network on the 4th of October, 1971. What happened on that day for the very last time? If you think you know, post a comment, ping us an email, tweet something, and we'll let you know who wins next week.
Jolly good. Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for. It's been a great discussion. I really enjoy doing all of them, but today's been a particularly lively show. We hope you've all enjoyed it. Please let us know what you think. Hit the thumbs up, ping us an email, comment on the website, however you want to let us know. Put something on LinkedIn. Steph, Richard, and I do try and answer as many emails and things as we can, but we do tend to fall a little bit.
A lot of them.
A little bit behind. Yes, and we're all long past the day. Well, you and I are past the days when we had a PA, Richard. So we're really struggling now. We're having to find out what life's like in the real world.
And do look at the website because on this there's going to be loads of additional stuff this week with all those links we talked about during the show. So,
there will. And looking at the YouTube homepage, I see that your Monsell Dale video is advancing towards 1,000 steadily views. Yeah. So that's really good. So we've got ideas for some others, haven't we, Richard? That we're
loads.
We're both going to get out filming when we can with our gimbals.
Yeah.
And watch this space, as they say. But anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for listening, for watching, for your support, your friendship and comments and everything else. We really, really do enjoy being with you and working with you and doing these shows. So we'll see you again next week. But for now, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.